call it the podcast primary. Democrats logging more than 1,200 podcast appearances ahead of 2020. But will this campaign strategy work?
Well, here to weigh in is Michael Knowles, host of the Michael Knowles Show. Michael, are we at the podcast primary point at this point?
We absolutely are. Totally unselfishly, as host of the Michael Knowles Show podcast, I strongly encourage candidates and the sitting president to come on podcasts because, as you see, from 2016 to the present, podcast audiences are way up. In 2016, about 36% of Americans had ever listened to a podcast. Today, that number is over 50%. And the audiences skew much younger, which is very important because, unlike in 2016, in 2020, millennials will approach, if not surpass, the baby boomers as the largest eligible voter group in America. This obviously is particularly important for Democrats who rely on young voters to go out there to mobilize their voter effort. But President Trump can't afford to ignore podcasts either. It's also a much more intimate format. That's why the ad rates are so much more expensive than they are on, say, radio. To ignore podcasts in the 2020 election would be like ignoring television in the 1950s, and that did not turn out very well for Adlai Stevenson.
Yeah.
Michael, let's take a look at some of the 2020 Democrats who have logged the most appearances. Number one, you have Marianne Williamson, 154 appearances total airtime over 4 days. 2, Andrew Yang, 98 appearances total airtime, 2 days, 13 hours. Number 3, Mr. Joe Biden, 371 appearances, 1 day, 23 hours. And Pete Buttigieg, 72 appearances, 1 day, 11 hours. Tim Ryan, 1 day, 9 hours, 54 podcast appearances. So who do you think needs this most is my question to you, because I think Joe Biden actually could benefit from this a lot. He needs to get some of his personality and some of his energy out there, particularly with young voters who might be drawn to the Bernie Sanders, to the Elizabeth Warrens of the world, to the AOC style wing of the Democratic Party.
Of course, Joe Biden has been in politics since about the mid-19th century, so I think if he wants to prove to voters that he's got some modern appeal and relevance, he has to do it. But I think what this shows you is that podcasts as a medium cuts across all sorts of candidates. You have these fringe candidates like Marianne Williamson who are benefiting. The only way that they're getting their message out there and getting their name out there is by going on these alternative media. And you have people like Joe Biden, who is establishment as it gets. Joe Biden is also not ignoring podcasts, and I think President Trump should focus on it as well. You know, he is the king of social media when it comes to politics, and the new frontier is podcasting.
Bottom line, what you lay out about millennials listening to these podcasts, and in full disclosure, I ran a half marathon with my 18-year-old daughter. I was listening to Led Zeppelin to motivate me. She was listening to a podcast. I couldn't believe it. Bottom line, is it your view then that the key to the millennial vote is reaching those podcasts?
Absolutely. Technology is changing rapidly, so are the media. And if Twitter was the key to 2016, if YouTube was the key to 2008 and 2012, podcasting is the key to 2020.
Wow. Thanks, Michael, for being here. And I hope you book some of these big guns on your podcast. I will be tuning in for that.
That's right. The Michael Knowles podcast. Thanks,
Great to see you.